that when I was a little girl, I always used to dream that there was this ballet dancer, and she was doing that. And it was all about, trying to get off a respirator so you can die with dignity. So all of that's like a very heavy...
Rachel Welch, the Hollywood goddess, passed away in 2023, leaving behind an immeasurable sorrow for the world. Thousands mourned the incredible cinematic legacy she left, but no one knew the horrific battle she had endured for 8 decades. 4 shattered marriages, 5 abusive men, turning each day of Rachel's life into a living hell of excruciating torment. There were days when she cradled her 2 babies, crying from hunger in a rented apartment full of cockroaches and rats. Then days when she fought against delusions, running for her life, bloodied feet escaping a husband who had her sent to the hospital, convinced she had lost her mind. And even more shocking, the truth about the disease that slowly ravaged her, pushing her toward a tragic death. Before she passed, Rachel whispered these 2 words. The tragic life of Rachel Welch will be revealed right after this. Raquel Welch was born Jo Raquel Tejada on September 5, 1940, in Chicago, Illinois, into a family struggling with poverty so severe that even 3 meals a day were a luxury. Her father, Armando Carlos Tejada Urquizo, left Bolivia as a teenager, chasing the American dream, but all he found was back-breaking labor for mere pennies. Her mother, Josephine Sarah Hall, carried English and Scottish ancestry, passing down sharp, striking beauty to her firstborn daughter. As the eldest child in a household bound by extreme religious discipline, Raquel spent every Sunday trapped in church, suffocated by rigid rules that left no room for self-expression. Her younger siblings, James and Gail, formed their own close bond, often leaving her feeling isolated in a home where no one truly understood her. She grew up under relentless pressure, overwhelming loneliness, and worst of all, the sting of harsh discipline, both physical and emotional. The Chicago winters were cruel, but not as cruel as the nights inside the Tejada household. Raquel, just 6 years old, sat curled up in the corner of the kitchen, trying to make herself invisible. Her mother's soft cries mixed with the sound of a heavy boot scraping against the wooden floor. Her father loomed over her mother, his face twisted in a drunken rage. "Don't you dare talk back to me," he bellowed, knocking over a chair. It crashed to the floor, splintering into pieces. Raquel squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to disappear, but then she felt a rough hand yank her up by the arm. "You think you're better than me?" Armando snarled. The sharp slap came before she could answer, the sting burning across her cheek. Her little brother James whimpered in the corner, while Gail buried her face in her hands. She learned early that asking for too much, for anything at all, was dangerous. When she was 7, she made the mistake of envying a girl at church for her bright blue dress. That night, she tried to tell her mother, whispering her wish so softly it was almost a prayer. But Armando heard. "Dresses are for rich girls, not for ungrateful little brats," he hissed, before ripping the bow from her hair. She never asked again. A few years later, the family moved to La Jolla, a quiet seaside town near San Diego, clinging desperately to the hope of a better life. But instead of relief, the hardship only deepened. Raquel's father ruled their home like a tyrant, while her mother and the children served him like prisoners in their own house. He refused to speak Spanish at home, which led to years later, Raquel would confess with tears in her eyes that she felt like a part of her identity had been stolen. The beatings became more frequent. The tension in their rundown little house never eased. Then, in 1958, her parents divorced. Just like that, Raquel's first family shattered. The pain of that loss cut deep, and whether she realized it or not, it set the stage for the collapse of all 4 of her future marriages. Raquel never forgot that winter morning in 1958. She was 16, sitting in the kitchen, listening as her parents' voices tore through the thin walls. The moment she heard the finality in her father's tone, it felt like a cold blade sinking into her chest. "I'm sick of you and the kids. And Rachel, that eldest one, she's just as stupid as you," he spat before slamming the door and walking out without a second thought. Her mother, always composed, collapsed to her knees, sobbing, begging him to stay for the sake of their children. Raquel just sat there, numb, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. That night, she ran. Her feet pounded against the cracked pavement as she raced toward the cliffs. For years, she had fought to keep their family together, but now she was disappearing into the wreckage of their broken home. Tears burned down her pale cheeks, but she wouldn't let herself fall apart. Her mother still needed her. In the days that followed, her mother was swallowed by sorrow, and Raquel was forced to grow up overnight, carrying the weight of the household on her shoulders. In her darkest moments, she searched desperately for an escape, and she found it in ballet. The dance studio was run down, but her mother scraped together every last penny to pay for lessons. Raquel practiced in their backyard, her bare feet spinning on the cracked concrete, toes bleeding into the ground. Every turn was an act of rebellion, every leap a cry for freedom. For 10 years, she trained relentlessly, clinging to the hope that one day she'd stand on a stage where no one could hurt her. But fate had other plans, and just when she thought she had found salvation, it was ripped away from her in the cruelest way possible. It was a crisp afternoon in San Diego. Raquel stood in the dimly lit ballet studio. Her ballet teacher peered down at her, eyes devoid of warmth. "Your body's wrong," she said, as if delivering a death sentence. "Too curvy, too short. You'll never be a dancer." The words sliced through Raquel's chest. She stumbled out onto the street, the wind whipping against her tear-streaked face. She clutched her dance bag against her chest, as if it could hold together the pieces of her broken self. Rage overtook her as she was home. She punched the wall, again and again, until her knuckles split open, the pain sharp but dull in comparison to the agony in her chest. She buried her face in her pillow, muffling her sobs as the reality sunk in. It was over. Beauty pageants had been her salvation, and she clung to them like a lifeline. At just 14, she stood before the flashing cameras, crowned Miss Photogenic, her smile masking the terror she left behind closed doors. Then came Miss Contour, Miss La Jolla, Miss San Diego, one victory after another, each one proof that she was worth more than the bruises, more than the nights she spent wondering why love always came with pain. By the time she graduated from La Jolla High School in 1958, she had built a fortress of accomplishments around her. Vice president of her class, a cheerleader, an honor student. From the outside, she was a golden girl destined for greatness. But inside, she was crumbling. Her father's rage had carved wounds too deep to heal. The real battle was within. She knew she couldn't stay. She had to break free, had to find something beyond the shattered remnants of her childhood. Hollywood lured her in with the same sweet lies it told so many before her. But the price of freedom was steep, and she would pay it in ways she never imagined. At 19, she married James Welch, a lanky boy with soft hands and a softer voice. He was her high school sweetheart, a promise of safety after years of terror. Her mother hated him. "He's weak, a nobody." But she didn't care. She needed out. They wed in 1959, a rushed ceremony in a San Diego chapel, her white dress borrowed and too tight. Damon arrived that November, a squalling baby with her eyes. Tani followed in 1961, a fragile girl who'd inherit her mother's fire. Raquel was a wife and mother before she could blink, trapped in a dingy apartment where the walls closed in. James tried. He worked at a gas station, then a warehouse. But money was a ghost. Bills stacked up, and his patience frayed. He'd yell, she'd flinch, and soon his temper mirrored her father's. The rain was relentless that night in 1962. Raquel sat at the kitchen table, hands clenched in her lap, while James paced like a caged animal. "You spend too much," he finally snapped, slamming his fist on the table. She flinched, her mind flashing back to childhood nights when her father's voice had the same razor-sharp edge. "I work all damn day, and for what? To be broke? To come home to this?" She wanted to tell him it wasn't her fault, that she stretched every dollar, that she skipped meals so their children wouldn't go hungry. But she knew the look in his eyes, wild, desperate. Words wouldn't save her. Then, the plate shattered. The sound rang in her ears. She didn't scream, didn't cry. Just sat there, gripping the edge of the chair as he stormed out into the night, leaving behind a broken plate, a broken marriage, and a woman who had run out of places to hide. Raquel stood at the window, their son Damon clinging to her leg, Tani fussing in her arms. This time she wasn't a little girl. She was a mother, and she would not let her children live in fear. By 1964, the divorce was final. She kept his name, not out of love, but survival. Now she was alone, 23, with 2 kids and no plan. Survival meant scrapping. She landed a job as a weather girl at KFMB-TV in San Diego, pointing at maps with a smile she didn't feel. It was 1965, and the television studio buzzed with energy, but for her, it felt suffocating. Her $50 a week paycheck barely covered rent, let alone diapers and food for her children, Damon and Tani. Every night she came home to their wails, her body aching from another grueling shift, her stomach empty because feeding them came first. The couch in their tiny apartment sagged under her weight as she collapsed, too drained to eat, too worn to even cry. The strain only deepened when she enrolled at San Diego State College, chasing the flickering dream of acting. But reality was unkind. Between her job and motherhood, there were barely hours left for sleep, let alone studies. Yet, she fought through it, flipping through textbooks in the dead of night, memorizing lines with a baby balanced on her hip. Then, one cold morning, her fragile balance shattered. Tani burned with fever, her tiny body trembling in her arms. She held her daughter close, whispering reassurances she barely believed. An exam loomed that afternoon, a crucial one, but she knew where she had to be. Hours passed in the hospital, her heart pounding with fear, and by the time she returned home, her fate was sealed. A crisp note from her professor greeted her: "Drop out or fail." The words hit like a slap. Everything she had sacrificed, endless nights, skipped meals, desperate prayers, meant nothing. The world expected her to choose, and she did. Her children needed her, more than her dreams ever could. She had nothing to lose. In 1963, she made a choice. With a trembling hand, she packed her life into a rusted-out Chevy. Dallas, the city of oil money and bright lights. It had to be better than this. She arrived with 20 crumpled dollars in her pocket and babies on her hip, hope stretched thin like a thread about to snap. The room she found was barely livable. Walls stained with old nicotine, a single window crusted with filth. Roaches scurried across the wooden floor, making themselves at home among the cracked tiles. She tried not to cry as she settled in, pretending it was just a stop on the way to something better. Desperation drove her to Neiman Marcus, where she stood in borrowed heels, letting rich women judge her like a piece of fruit. They paid her to pose, to smile, to be something she wasn't: polished, desirable, expensive. But she felt their eyes, the way men let their gazes slide over her body like grease, and she swallowed back the nausea. It was money, at least. At night, she worked the bar. The tips were pitiful. $3. $4. She counted them in the dim light of her room, her fingers shaking as she wondered if it would be enough to buy milk. She prayed it would be. Then came the winter, cruel and relentless. Damon's small body burned with fever, his coughs breaking through the night like shattered glass. She held him in the tiny bathroom, turning the shower on full blast, filling the air with thick, wet heat. Her hands trembled as she rocked him, whispering desperate apologies, pressing kisses to his damp forehead. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The words poured out of her like a prayer, a plea for mercy. The city hadn't saved her. It had swallowed her whole. But going back wasn't an option. Forward was the only way, even if it meant clawing her way out, one broken fingernail at a time. She rolled the dice again, but this time, fate had loaded them against her. It was 1963 when she packed up her children and fled east, chasing Hollywood. She rented a rundown room, barely livable, the walls thin enough to hear the next-door fight. Every morning she went to war, auditions where casting directors eyed her like a meal, where they sneered, "You're beautiful, but can you act?" She landed scraps, a witch in Bewitched, a sailor's girl in McHale's Navy, but the checks barely fed them. She posed as a billboard girl on the Hollywood Palace, Her face a decoration, her talent a joke. Her stomach growled from hunger. She smiled anyway. Her children, too young to understand, waited at home with babysitters. She had to make this work. Then Patrick Curtis arrived. A former child actor who had long since learned the game, he saw her for what she was, desperate and willing. He didn't just see potential, he saw profit. "You're a gold mine," he whispered, sliding closer. She should have run, but she was drowning, and he offered land. She took his hand, and soon, his name. In 1967, they married, and he remade her. He erased the Latina roots. When the cameras stopped rolling, the real Patrick emerged, a man who controlled and manipulated the woman he claimed to cherish. Los Angeles, 1970. The screaming began just after midnight. Patrick had been drinking again. The accusations came first. She wasn't grateful. She was too independent. She needed to remember who made her a star. Then came the hands. A glass shattered against the wall, shards spraying across the floor. Her breath hitched as she pressed herself into the corner of their lavish bedroom, eyes darting toward the door. But there was no escaping him. He struck her, the force knocking her onto the bed. The silky sheets caught her tears as she lay still, knowing resistance would only make it worse. The next morning, the mask went back on. At premieres, she clung to his arm, smiling as if her ribs weren't aching beneath her dress. Her kids stayed with sitters, their "Where's Mommy?" calls stabbing her heart. She'd cry in bathrooms, mascara running, whispering, "I'm doing this for you." And yet, she stayed. She told herself it was for survival, for her children, for the career she had fought so hard to build. But in truth, she stayed because he had shattered her so completely that she no longer knew who she was without him. Raquel Welch never had the luxury of easing into stardom. Fantastic Voyage threw her into the Hollywood machine in 1966. Playing Cora Peterson, a scientist miniaturized and injected into a human body, Welch battled more than just the film's scientific jargon. The set was an unrelenting battlefield where industry veterans like Stephen Boyd scrutinized her every move. Director Richard Fleischer's voice cut through the air like a blade. She spent nights rehearsing, wondering if her beauty was the only thing keeping her in the game. Then the film hit the screens, and everything changed. Fantastic Voyage became a sensation, bagging Academy Awards, but Rachel paid a price that no golden statue could ever compensate. At night, she lay in her rented room. She had called home earlier, desperate to hear her children's voices. Damon had spoken first, distracted, barely interested. "Hi, Mommy." Then Tawny's voice, tiny, fragile. "Are you coming home soon?" Her throat tightened. "Soon, baby. Soon." But she knew she was lying. Soon was never soon enough. When the movie wrapped, she returned to Hollywood as a superstar. The fur bikini had done its job. It had sold her, piece by piece, to the world. She was a goddess now, but in the process, she had lost herself. Patrick grinned as he held up the latest magazine cover, her body displayed like a trophy. "This is your ticket," he said. She wanted to scream. Her fame exploded. The roles didn't expand. Directors only asked if she'd wear less, smile more. She fought against it, took roles that defied the pin-up mold, but the public didn't want complexity. They wanted her body. Every day she played the part, and every night she sat in her dressing room, staring at the reflection that wasn't hers anymore. "What am I losing for this?" she'd whisper to the mirror. The answer deep down was everything. By the 1970s, her personal life was in shambles. Her marriage crumbled under the weight of her success. Her children barely recognized her. The career that had promised her everything had stolen it all instead. The 1970s should have crowned her queen, but every step forward sank her deeper into hell. In 1969, she starred in 100 Rifles, playing Sarita, a revolutionary in a gritty Western opposite Jim Brown, an ex-NFL star turned actor. Their love scene set the screen ablaze. The hate mail came in waves, envelopes stuffed with slurs, death threats from bigots who couldn't stomach a white woman with a black man. "You're a disgrace," one letter read, scrawled in red ink. Rachel kept them in her trailer, hands trembling as she read each one. One night, she snapped. She burned the letters in a trash can, flames licking the ceiling, her tears streaking the ash. "I didn't sign up for this," she whispered to herself. In 1970, Myra Breckenridge nearly destroyed her. She played Myra, a transgender woman dismantling Hollywood's patriarchy. When the movie bombed, the press crucified her. Vile, incoherent, the reviews spat. At home, the pressure shattered her marriage. By 1972, her husband Patrick had had enough. "You're too much," he said, shoving his suitcase into the car. She stood in their empty house, wine spilling from her glass, screaming into the void. Hollywood's final betrayal came in 1981. MGM cast her in Cannery Row, then fired her after 7 days, replacing her with Deborah Winger, younger, cheaper. "She's a has-been," the execs sneered. Rachel fought back, suing for breach of contract, $10.8 million at stake. In 1986, she won. Alone in her Los Angeles home, she stared at her awards. "I beat you," she murmured to herself, "but you killed me." Raquel Welch once believed she had finally found peace. When she married Andre Weinfeld in 1980, he promised her the world. For a while, they were happy. But like every time before, the marriage crumbled, leaving her with nothing but the familiar ache of another love lost. December 1987. Raquel sat on the floor, clutching her arm. The pain in her wrist throbbed. Andre had healed her once, but now he was the reason she was breaking all over again. He was gentle at first, always kind in public, a devoted husband. But behind the locked doors of their home, the air turned thick with something sinister. It started with small, sharp words, dismissive gestures. Then came the nights where he would disappear, returning with an emptiness in his eyes. But Raquel still hoped, still believed love could be salvaged. Until she walked into the guest room that night and saw her children cowering, their faces pale with fear. Andre had turned into a monster, a shadow of the father she had feared in her childhood. The past had found her again. Tears burned her eyes as she reached for his hand. "Please, Andre, stop. They're just children," she whispered. He only smirked, stepping back as if her pain was a play. By 1990, the cracks were too deep. She fled to Los Angeles, leaving Andre in New York. Andre would later call their marriage happy. But what did happiness mean to him? She wasn't mourning the loss of a husband. She was clawing her way out of a nightmare. The ones who suffered the most weren't just her. Her children, Damon and Tanny, bore the brunt of her choices. March 3, 1991. Damon had barely looked at her. When she approached, he gave a stiff nod, his posture frozen. His wedding ceremony was breathtaking. Raquel's eyes were dry. She was too numb to cry. From the very last row, she watched her only son vow his love to another woman, while she remained nothing more than a ghost in his life. She was no longer a mother in his eyes. The guests whispered, throwing glances in her direction. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't wanted. But it was Tani who suffered in silence. Born into her mother's shadow in 1961, she tried to carve her own identity. The weight of being Raquel Welch's daughter suffocated her. She watched her mother slip away, year after year, caught in the grip of Hollywood's demands. Birthdays passed with tearful apologies over the phone, promises of next time that never came. And when she finally walked away from the industry in the 80s, it was the hope that her mother would ever truly see her. Raquel tried. She tried in fleeting embraces, in whispered apologies. She tried when she clutched her children, tears staining their shoulders, begging for their understanding. "I did my best," she would sob, but her best was never enough. Their silence was deafening. Guilt followed her, heavier than any trophy, darker than any role she ever played. No matter how much she longed for stability, happiness remained just out of reach. It was late 2003 when the cracks in her fourth marriage to Richard Palmer became too deep. The nightmares had started again, each one worse than the last. Faces from the past, her abusive father, the controlling men she had given her heart to, haunted her sleep. She'd wake up drenched in sweat, gasping for air, her body trembling. Richard would try to hold her, to soothe her, but she'd shove him away, screaming, not recognizing his face in the darkness. At first, he was patient. "Raquel, you need help," he whispered one night after finding her curled up in a corner, whispering to ghosts. But the mere suggestion sent her into a rage. She wasn't crazy. She was just tired, just overwhelmed, just broken. As the months passed, she became a shadow of herself. The once radiant, confident woman was now frail, her frame shrinking as she stopped eating, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. She'd disappear for hours, wandering the empty halls, mumbling to herself. Richard begged her to seek treatment, but she refused. Hospitals meant weakness, and Raquel Welch had spent her entire life proving she was strong. Then came the breaking point. One cold evening in early 2004, Richard came home to find her pacing the driveway in nothing but a silk robe, her bare feet scraped and bleeding. She was muttering about betrayal, about men who used her, about love that never lasted. When he tried to pull her inside, she fought him, clawing at his arms, screaming. He held her tight, his voice cracking as he pleaded, "Please, let me help you." But she only sobbed harder. There was nothing left to save. She was drowning in her own mind. The next day, Richard made the hardest decision of his life. He called a doctor, arranged for her to get the care she needed. When she realized what was happening, she tried to run, slipping out the back door. But he caught her, holding her trembling body as she screamed. The sight of her, so desperate, so terrified, it shattered him. He had promised to love her, but love wasn't enough to pull her from the abyss. Weeks later, he was gone. He couldn't do it anymore. He packed his things and walked away, leaving behind a woman too broken to be saved. And just like that, Raquel Welch was alone again, standing in the ruins of another failed love story. Her laughter on television interviews masked a lifetime of suffering. When she told Piers Morgan in 2015, "I'm unlovable," it wasn't a joke. It was a confession wrapped in irony. And perhaps the most tragic part was that, deep down, she truly believed it. Raquel Welch died on February 15, 2023, at 82, in her Los Angeles home. A brief illness, they said. But Alzheimer's was the real killer. It all started in the 2010s. They didn't notice the dazzling star of Hollywood began to forget her lines, names, faces, places. She'd brush it off with a smile, an apology, a deflection. "I'm fine," she'd say, even as her once sharp gaze blurred. By 2020, the disease had tightened its grip. The rooms were empty, save for old posters of her most famous films. They stared down at her as she sat, her once strong fingers trembling as she reached out to touch the faces in the photos. "Who's that girl?" she'd ask, the voice filled with confusion. The sadness was unbearable, like a cruel twist of fate, her memories of her own iconic life slipping away, forgotten. Her mind unraveled slowly. Nurses became her constant companions, tending to her, feeding her, bathing her. In her vulnerable state, she cried for a mother she could no longer recall. Alzheimer's had taken her slowly, piece by piece. She spent her last days alone in that sterile bed, her family distant, Damon and Tani, her children sending love from afar, their lives tangled and distant from the woman they once knew. She was surrounded by strangers, nurses who were the only faces she recognized. Her vibrant eyes were now vacant, her once powerful voice a mere whisper lost in the fog of her mind. "Where am I?" she would ask, clutching at the sheets in terror. Her suffering was not quick. By 2021, her body had betrayed her completely. She could no longer walk without assistance, her legs faltering. She shuffled to the window, gazing at the LA skyline, mumbling about the ballet slippers she used to wear, the fur bikinis that had become her trademark. One night, nurses found her collapsed on the floor, clutching a photograph of her children, Damon and Tawny, as kids. "My babies," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips, unaware that they had long since grown up, living lives without her. The end came quietly, a last breath, a flicker of peace. And then, silence. The world had lost an icon. Her legacy is a jagged shard of glass. That bikini from 1 million years BC hangs in history, a symbol of her power, but it's the pain behind it that lingers. She fought her father's violence, Hollywood's sexism, love's betrayals, and a disease that erased her. She won pageants, starred in hits, beat MGM for 10.8 million, but lost her family, her peace, herself. Damon and Tawny carry her name, her fire, but also her wounds, proof of a mother who gave too much to a world that took more. Strength isn't glory. It's surviving when the world wants you dead. Raquel Welch didn't just endure. She blazed, even as the fire consumed her. She was a rebel, a mother, a broken girl who dared to rise. Her tragedy screams at us, don't let them define you, even if it costs your soul.